Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Ohio.
I reserve the right to object. Mr. President, my colleague raises concerns about the effect of retaliatory tariffs on our farmers and others. I couldn't agree more. But we should not pit farmers against steelworkers. Only a few days after candidate Trump became President-elect Trump, my first correspondence with him was how we do trade policy in the next few years. One of the conditions, one of the admonitions, if you will, was you don't play off one industry against another. You don't play off agriculture against autos or steel or chemicals or anybody else. But it benefits all Americans. And I think my colleagues agree with this. It benefits all Americans if we stop China cheating, if we force them to play by the rules. I would say to my colleagues today, to Senator Toomey and Senator Corker, and I understand they have some bipartisan support on this, I'd say that probably the worst thing you do for for America's farmers is to jeopardize passage of the Farm Bill today. I've spoken with Senator Roberts and Senator Stabenow about that. That's exactly what this amendment would do. The amendment would gut, most importantly, it would gut one of our trade enforcement tools, a tool Congress passed and enhanced in the Finance Committee just in the last couple of years, passed to ensure we protect the industries necessary to defend our country. I know my colleague from Tennessee generally opposes the president's trade agenda. I think he does that from an intellectually honest position, but that is not justification for completely undoing a decades-old statute that is one of the few tools we have to defend national security interests against distortions in the global market. The steel and aluminum tariffs the president has put in place are long overdue actions to defend against further shrinking of two sectors critical to national defense. Senator Toomey certainly knows this in the western part of his state, as I know it in mine. I know my colleagues agree that excess steel production capacity in China is troubling. We're talking about a country that now has the capacity to produce half the world's steel, close to half the smelting, half the world's aluminum. It's infected the global market. It's made steel overcapacity a global problem. We know that China puts people to work because they can't afford to have tens of millions of young men unemployed in the countryside. They subsidize their energy and their water and their capital and their land. They have dozens of government-owned enterprises. They want to keep their people to work. They cheat when they do. That's just very simple. We have an administration now finally willing to take action and defend our highly competitive steel industry and steelworkers. And I know what a competitive steel plant looks like. I was at ArcelorMittal in Cleveland, 7 miles from my house only a week ago. That's the first steel mill in the world that's been able to produce raw steel with 1 person hour, with 1 person hour of labor. Think of that, a ton of steel produced by one person hour. That tells you how productive our plants are. But against China cheating and subsidizing damn near all the components, we simply can't do that. The state of Tennessee perhaps has been lucky to avoid the devastation brought to steel towns like Steubenville, in Yorkville, in Martins Ferry, in Warren, in Lorain, all cities in Ohio, up and down the Mon River in Pennsylvania. Senator Toomey said the same thing. All as a result of China's excess capacity. But the shuttered steel mill and thousands of steel workers in Ohio who lost their jobs are constant reminders for my state that this trade enforcement action taken by the president was long overdue. We have to have steel and aluminum sectors in this country to defend ourselves. It's that simple. We won't have these critical sectors if our steel and aluminum producers can't keep their doors open. This section of the statute, 232, was Congress's way some time ago of acknowledging there are connections between trade and national security. Imports can undermine our national security. Congress has recognized that for years. There should be ways for the president to take action when that's the case. The Corker Amendment fundamentally rejects that idea and hamstrings the president's ability to protect America's national security interests. Even worse, Corker Amendment would immediately remove the 232 steel and aluminum tariffs, including those on China. Why would any colleagues vote to let China off the hook? Just look at the bipartisan effort to pass the Foreign Investment Risk Review and Modernization Act. It passed down the hall, I believe, with only 2 no votes. There's broad bipartisan support also for ensuring the president take a tough stance with ZTE, which he has not been wild about doing. But for some reason, when it comes to aluminum and steel, it's okay to let China off the hook. It makes no sense. I know some of my colleagues who support this amendment will say they support the president's actions if they were targeted just to China. They think the Corker Amendment's necessary because the president has applied these tariffs to our allies. But steel overcapacity is a global problem. It needs a global solution. If we don't take a more comprehensive action, China will cheat their way into those other markets. Ask ArcelorMittal, ask Nucor, ask AK Steel, ask U.S. Steel, just to name a few domestic producers we have in my state. They've all seen the tricks China uses to work around our anti-dumping and countervailing duty laws. Or look at the findings of Ambassador Lighthizer recent report on China's intellectual property theft. He found that China was stealing about $50 billion of intellectual property from the U.S. every single year. The evidence is clear. China is determined. I understand China. I don't even particularly fault them because they're acting in their national interest. Maybe we should try to do the same thing because China's determined to gain U.S. market share in technological advances. They'll stop at nothing to get it. I agree we should work with our allies in this. The administration, to a degree, has. They've negotiated agreements with South Korea and Brazil and Argentina and Australia. Some of my colleagues are concerned, rightly, about Canada and Mexico being covered by the tariffs. I share that concern, but gutting trade enforcement is not the way to fix that. I work with the administration to reach a solution through negotiations. I encourage my colleagues to do the same. I spoke to Ambassador Lighthizer again late last night. We're in a holding pattern with NAFTA talks until Mexico's elections in about a week. But soon after that, NAFTA talks will pick right up. Steel and aluminum tariffs will be part of that dialogue, as they should be. Because Canada and Mexico have such close proximity to our market, they are primary targets for Chinese transshipment. We have to guard against that, or the Section 232 tariffs won't simply be effective. And in closing, before my final remarks, I'm confident an agreement with our NAFTA partners can be reached. I hope it's reached soon. Canada and Mexico are an important part of the North American steel supply chain. They're important partners in making sure our efforts to address steel overcapacity are effective. The tariffs have been effective. Just yesterday, Republic Steel announced that one of its rolling mills in Lorain, Ohio would restart in September. In Granite City, Illinois, 800 steel workers were called back to work. The Corker Amendment would threaten these new jobs, would thwart other announcements of steel mills restarting in the U.S. So summarize, the Corker Amendment would permanently undermine a long-standing section of statute that makes sure the U.S. has the industries necessary to defend itself. It would let bad actors like China off the hook and able to flood our markets with unfairly traded steel. It disregards ongoing negotiations with our NAFTA partners. It threatens the improvements seen in our steel and aluminum industries since the tariffs were opposed. For all those reasons, Mr. President, I object.